Hello everyone. I'm Emma Wilson, 34 years old, and I have a story that is equal parts wild and heartbreaking. A few weeks ago, I reached the most significant milestone of my life. I purchased my first home after years of hard work, working 2 jobs and saving every penny I could. It was supposed to be my moment of pure joy, the kind you dream about as a child. But instead, I received a court summons, which turned my world upside down. My own parents, Susan and Robert Wilson, were suing me for the house I had purchased with my own blood, sweat, and tears. In the courtroom, one piercing question from the judge shattered their entire plan, leaving them stunned. Before I get into this unbelievable story, please leave a comment below to let me know where you're reading from, and click the like button to support others dealing with family drama. Growing up in a sleepy little town in Ohio, money was always a concern in our household. My parents were like captains of a sinking ship, desperately trying to plug one leak while new ones appeared everywhere. I can't remember a year when we didn't get a utility shut-off notice taped to our door or stuffed in our mailbox. The electricity would go out for days, leaving us in the dark, fumbling with candles. In the winter, we'd bundle up in blankets and borrow space heaters from friendly neighbors to keep warm. My friends stopped calling because the phone line was so unreliable, on one month and off the next. When the water was turned off, I'd take my little blue wagon to the park and fill plastic jugs at the public fountain before hauling them home, sloshing all the way. Eviction notices were as common as birthday cards, and we had moved 6 times before I was 14, always sneaking out at night, leaving unpaid rent and angry landlords behind. Each new apartment was smaller, dingier, and located in a less desirable neighborhood. My school records were a disorganized jumble of different districts, transfer forms, and incomplete grades. "It's just for a little while, Emma," Mom would say, her voice heavy as we packed our belongings into black garbage bags. "Things will turn around soon." But that soon was a promise that never materialized. When I turned 18, I landed my first real job at a local supermarket, and I'll never forget the rush of pride holding my first paycheck. $198.50, earned through my own hard work. That joy lasted about 2 hours until Dad cornered me, asking to borrow $100 for an urgent bill. I hesitated, nervously asking when he'd pay it back, and his face darkened like a storm cloud. "After all we've done for you, you're questioning us? We've fed you, clothed you, given you a place to live. This is how you show gratitude." Guilt churned in my gut, and I handed over the cash. It was never mentioned again, never repaid. This wasn't just with me. They'd burned every family bridge. Aunt Lisa gave them $400 for a medical emergency, only to see a shiny new gaming console appear in our living room days later. Uncle Tom paid 2 months of their rent, then found out they'd spent it on a weekend trip to Las Vegas. Grandma stopped taking their calls after too many one-last-time loans. After high school, I made a silent promise to myself. I'd never let my life spiral into their chaos. While my friends headed to big colleges with dorms and meal plans, I chose a nearby community college with a strong transfer program. I worked 25 hours a week at the supermarket, juggling a full course load. My apartment was a cramped attic with a single burner instead of a stove, but it was mine, and I paid the rent on time every time. Later, I transferred to a state college to finish my finance degree. My days were relentless, classes from morning to afternoon, work from evening to night, and a second job stocking shelves at a warehouse 4 nights a week. Sleep was a luxury I could barely afford. Meanwhile, my parents' money troubles sank deeper. They bounced from one apartment to another, always with the same tired excuses. Dad was fired for unfair reasons. Mom quit jobs because they didn't value her. They took out car loans until they owed more than the cars were worth, and credit card bills piled up like a tower ready to topple. Even though I tried to keep my money separate, guilt pulled me back when things got really bad. They were 2 months behind on their rent, and Mom had the flu, so I sent them $1,000 that I had carefully saved. I bought them back for $800 when their car was about to be taken away. Every time I told myself it would be the last time, but something else always came up. They would say, "Just until we get back on our feet. We promised to pay you back." When I was 27, I got a good job at a finance company. I could finally pay my bills and save some money. I set up an emergency fund and joined the retirement plan at work, which made me feel a little safer about my money. Then they came up with a great idea. They loved the car they saw but couldn't get a loan because their credit was so bad. They promised to make all of their payments on time so that their credit would improve, so they asked me to co-sign. I said no for the first time. I said, I can't risk my credit. In case you don't pay, it will hurt my chances of getting more loans in the future. The way they reacted was like a volcano erupting. They said I was heartless, selfish, and ungrateful. Mom cried and said she had raised a daughter who didn't care. Dad told me I had forgotten about my family since I had big money. Family members called to talk about my betrayal. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do, to say no. But it was the first step toward setting limits that would lead us to court. My career was taking off 5 years after the car loan fight. I'd been promoted twice at the finance firm, earning the trust of clients and establishing a solid reputation. I began to fantasize about owning my own home, which I had previously thought was impossible. Laura Green, a mortgage advisor, was open and supportive. Your income and credit are in great shape, she said as she reviewed my paperwork. But you'll need 20% down to avoid extra fees, plus closing costs and an emergency fund. About $55,000 for the neighborhoods you're looking at. It was a daunting number, but I was determined to get it done. That night I sat down with a notebook and devised a 5-year savings strategy, outlining exactly how much I'd need to save each month. I eliminated all non-essential spending. No more restaurant meals, no new clothes unless they came from thrift stores, and no vacations other than free hikes in local parks. My old car had to keep running. To supplement my income, I began doing budgeting work for small businesses on weekends, eventually establishing a steady roster of 6 clients. Between my day job and side hustle, I was working 65 hours per week. It was exhausting, but each dollar saved brought me closer to realizing my dream. I shared my house buying plan with my parents during a rare, peaceful dinner. At first they seemed genuinely excited. That's wonderful, Emma, Mom said, her eyes lighting up. Owning a home is a smart investment. Dad nodded in agreement. Good move. Property is how you build real wealth. But as my savings grew over the months, their tone changed. Subtle hints crept into our talks. Your cousin Noah's struggling to feed his kids, Mom would say, her voice heavy with implication. Our heater broke and the landlord's taking forever to fix it, Dad added, his eyes lingering on me. I tried to redirect them gently. I'm on a super tight budget to hit my down payment goal. Have you looked into that housing assistance program I mentioned? After 4 years of relentless saving, side jobs, and watching every penny, I finally had enough for my down payment, closing costs, and a solid emergency fund. It was time to start house hunting. My realtor, Sarah Jones, was patient and kind as we toured dozens of homes. I didn't want anything fancy, just a sturdy starter home with potential. After 4 months of searching, we found the perfect one. A cozy 3-bedroom house built in the 1970s. It needed some paint and minor updates, but the roof, heater, and plumbing were all new. The backyard was small but private, and the monthly payment was less than my current rent. The day my offer was accepted felt like crossing the finish line of a marathon. I called my parents, hoping they'd share my excitement. How much did you pay? Dad asked right away, his voice sharp. $275,000, I said proudly. It's a great deal for the area, and the schools are top-notch. There was a long silence on the other end. So you saved over $50,000, Mom said, her tone almost accusing. Yes, I worked years to save that, I replied, my heart sinking. Another pause. We could have used some help with our medical bills last year, Mom snapped. I guess your house was more important than your dad's heart medicine. My stomach twisted. Dad's medications were covered by a county health program, but Mom insisted it wasn't enough. We had to choose between his pills and groceries some months, she said bitterly. But I'm sure your fancy house is worth it. The conversation turned into a full-blown argument. For the first time, they openly said I should have been using my money to help them instead of saving for myself. As our daughter, your savings should put us first, Dad said. Buying a house while we're struggling is just selfish. I stood my ground, my voice shaking but firm. I've helped you whenever I could, but this is my dream. I worked hard for it, and I'm not going to apologize for that. The 6 weeks leading up to closing were stressful, filled with home inspections, endless paperwork, and anxious waiting. My parents stayed distant, sending cold texts or passive-aggressive jabs. On closing day, I sat at the title office, signing document after document, my heart racing with pride. When the keys were placed in my hand, I was officially a homeowner. That night, I sat on the floor of my empty living room, eating takeout pizza and staring at the bare walls of my new home. It should have been a moment of pure joy, but my parents' disapproval cast a shadow over it. Still, I refused to let them dim my achievement. This house was the result of years of sacrifice, and no one could take that away from me. For 2 weeks after moving in, communication with my parents was minimal. Just a few short texts and one quick phone call where they asked about the move, but offered no help or congratulations. It hurt, but the quiet was a relief as I focused on settling into my new space. Then, one Saturday afternoon, their car pulled into my driveway without warning. They stepped out carrying gift bags, their smiles so warm and genuine that I let my guard down for a moment. "Surprise!" Mom called out, holding up a vibrant flowering cactus. "We brought housewarming gifts for your new place." Cautiously hopeful, I invited them inside. They seemed impressed as I gave them a tour, complimenting the gleaming wood floors and the open, airy kitchen. Mom handed me the cactus, saying it would bring life to my home, while Dad gave me a set of sleek, modern coffee mugs. "These are beautiful," I said, genuinely touched by what felt like a peace offering. We settled in the living room with cups of tea, and for a brief, shining moment, it felt like the family celebration I'd always longed for. A moment of shared pride in my milestone. Then Dad cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on his mug. "We've got a bit of a situation at our place," he said, his voice low. "The landlord sold our building to some developer, and we have to be out by the end of next month." My heart sank, but I kept my tone sympathetic. "That's awful," I said. "Have you started looking for a new place?" Mom let out a bitter laugh, devoid of humor. "In this rental market? Everything's twice what we're paying now. We can't afford anything decent. Not with your dad's medical bills and my reduced hours at work." The air grew heavy, and I braced myself for what was coming. "Here's the thing," Dad continued. "You've got 3 bedrooms here and it's just you. We were thinking we could move in for a little while. Just 3 months, 6 at the most, until we get back on our feet." I'd half expected this, but hearing it aloud sent a wave of anxiety through me. Their temporary stays had a way of stretching into years, and their financial crises never truly ended, they just got postponed. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said carefully, choosing my words. "I'm still getting settled myself." Mom jumped in quickly. "We'd contribute, of course. We could pay a little rent once we're stable, help with groceries." I shook my head. "It's not just about money. It's about boundaries and independence. This is my first home, and I need to experience it on my own terms." Their faces hardened, their smiles vanishing. "I see," Dad said, his voice icy. "So your own parents could end up on the street, but you need your space." "Got it. You won't be homeless," I insisted, trying to keep calm. "There are rental assistance programs. I can help you look for affordable apartments." "We don't want charity," Mom snapped, her eyes flashing. "We thought family helps family. Isn't that why you bought a house with extra bedrooms?" The conversation spiraled as they revealed their true feelings. They'd assumed all along that my house was partly for their benefit. In their minds, my years of saving were selfish because I hadn't shared the money with them, and now my extra bedroom should naturally be theirs. "We always thought when you succeeded you'd take care of us the way we took care of you," Dad said, his voice heavy with accusation. "When have you ever taken care of me?" The words burst out before I could stop them. "I've been financially independent since I was 18. I've given you thousands of dollars over the years, and you've never paid back a cent." Mom's face turned red with anger. "Is that what you think? That parenting comes with a price tag? We gave you life, a roof over your head, food. A roof we kept losing because you couldn't pay rent," I countered, my voice rising. "Food we sometimes got from food banks because you spent bill money on things we didn't need." The argument grew heated until they stormed out, slamming the door behind them. Mom cried dramatically, declaring she'd raised a stranger with no heart. Dad shouted that I'd regret turning my back on family. I was left shaking, questioning myself. Had I been too harsh? Was I being selfish? The guilt I'd carried since childhood whispered that good daughters sacrifice for their parents. That evening I called my best friend Mia, still reeling. "You did the right thing," she assured me after hearing the story. If you let them move in even for a little while, you'll never get them out. This house you worked so hard for will just become their next source of stress. But they're my parents, I said, my voice breaking. They should be cheering for your success, not trying to guilt you into giving it up, Mia said firmly. Parents are supposed to want their kids to thrive, not see them as a retirement plan. Over the next week, my phone exploded with messages and calls. Not just from my parents, but from aunts, uncles, and cousins who'd heard a twisted version of events. My parents had told everyone they'd help me buy my house, and now I was kicking them to the curb when they needed a place to stay. Is it true you refused to help your parents after they gave you money for your down payment? Aunt Karen demanded in a voicemail. Your mom's crying every day over your betrayal, Cousin Liam texted. The lies were so far from reality that I could barely breathe. Not only had my parents never given me a single dollar for my house, but I'd been the one giving them money for years. It became clear they'd been spinning this story to family long before their visit, and the housewarming gifts were a calculated move to set the stage for their request to move in and the family pressure campaign that followed my refusal. Mia was my anchor, letting me vent without judgment. Document everything, she advised. Save those texts and voicemails. You're going to need proof of their lies. Her words proved prophetic sooner than either of us expected. 3 weeks after their visit, I found an official-looking envelope in my mailbox. I assumed it was mortgage paperwork, but my heart stopped when I saw the words summons to appear and civil case number 58312 at the top. The plaintiffs were Susan and Robert Wilson, my parents. The defendant was me. They were suing me for breach of verbal contract and unjust enrichment related to my house purchase. I read the document 3 times, certain it was a mistake. They claimed they'd given me money for my down payment under a verbal agreement that they'd live with me, and I'd broken that promise by refusing them. I was in shock. My parents were taking me to court over my house. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. With shaking hands, I called Mia. They're suing you for what? She practically shouted. They say they gave me money for my house and I promised they could live there, I explained. Mia, they never gave me a cent. Not one. This is beyond messed up, she said. You need a lawyer like yesterday. I know someone, Rachel Carter, who helped my brother with a property dispute. I'll send you her number. The next morning I sat in Rachel's office, the summons and my financial records spread across her desk. So let me get this straight, she said, reviewing the papers. Your parents claim they contributed money to your home purchase with an agreement that they'd live there. But in reality, they provided nothing at all. Exactly, I confirmed. I saved every dollar myself over 4 years. I have bank statements, pay stubs, tax returns, everything showing where the money came from. Rachel nodded, jotting down notes. Was there ever any discussion, even casually, about them living with you? Never, I said firmly. The first time it came up was after I'd already closed on the house, when they showed up with those gifts. She explained that my parents' case hinged on 2 claims, that they'd given me significant money for the house, and that there was a verbal agreement for them to live there. In these cases, the burden is on them to prove they gave you money, she said. But we need to be thorough. Their lawyer claims they gave you cash payments over several years that went into your savings. That's completely false, I insisted. They never gave me money. I gave them money to help with their bills, and I have records of those transfers. As we dug deeper, a disturbing picture emerged. My parents had been telling family members for years that they were helping me save for my house. Some relatives believed they'd given me tens of thousands of dollars. Others thought they'd co-signed my mortgage. The lies were so detailed and widespread it was staggering. They created an entire fictional story, I said, stunned. And people believed them because why would parents lie about something like that? Unfortunately, I've seen cases like this, Rachel said. Usually not between parents and kids, but between friends or relatives claiming verbal agreements that never existed. The good news is, without documentation of their contributions, their case is very weak. Preparing for the court date was one of the toughest periods of my life. I gathered every financial record I could find, bank statements going back 5 years, pay stubs, tax returns, receipts from my side jobs. Rachel helped me organize it all into a clear timeline, showing exactly where every dollar of my down payment came from. My own hard work and discipline. The stress seeped into every part of my life. I couldn't sleep, replaying old conversations, worrying I'd said something they could twist into a promise. My work performance slipped as I struggled to focus. My supervisor, Maria, noticed and called me into her office one afternoon. "Emma, you seem distracted lately. Is everything okay?" I hadn't told anyone at work, embarrassed by the whole mess, but Maria was always kind, so I gave her a condensed version of the situation. To my surprise, she was incredibly supportive. Family conflicts are some of the hardest things to navigate, especially when they go legal, she said. "Would you like to adjust your schedule? Maybe work from home a couple days a week?" Her compassion meant the world, letting me meet with Rachel and prepare my testimony without burning through my vacation days. The night before the court date, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by neatly labeled folders of documents. Everything was ready and our case was rock solid, but I felt hollow inside. How had it come to this? Facing my own parents in court over lies they'd spun about me. I thought about all the times I'd helped them, the thousands of dollars I'd given, the emotional support despite their reckless choices. Was this house worth destroying what little relationship we had left? For a fleeting moment, I considered calling them to offer a compromise. Maybe they could stay for a strictly limited time with a formal rental agreement. Then I remembered Mia's words. "If you let them move in, even temporarily, you'll never get them out." She was right. Their temporary stays were never temporary. Their financial crises were never one-time fixes but symptoms of deeper patterns they refused to change. This house represented everything I'd worked for: stability, security, independence. Compromising now would mean surrendering not just my space, but the boundaries I'd fought so hard to build. I went to bed determined to stand my ground, but sleep didn't come until well past midnight. The morning of the court hearing dawned gray and drizzly, matching my heavy mood. Rachel had advised me to dress conservatively and professionally. "First impressions matter," she said. "The judge will be assessing your credibility from the moment you step into the courtroom." Walking into the county courthouse, I spotted my parents in the hallway with their lawyer, a tall man in an expensive-looking suit. Mom was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, while Dad stood with his arms crossed, his jaw tight. They looked up as I approached with Rachel, and for a brief moment our eyes met. There was no warmth, no hint of the pain this was causing us all, just cold determination. It was the first time I'd seen them since the fight in my living room, and the emotional weight hit me harder than I expected. These were the people who'd tucked me into bed as a child, cheered at my high school graduation, and now we were adversaries in a legal battle over their fabrications. I nearly faltered, but Rachel gently touched my elbow, guiding me past them into the courtroom, and the moment of weakness passed. The courtroom was smaller than I'd pictured. Nothing like the grand chambers in TV dramas. Wooden benches, fluorescent lights, and beige walls gave it a plain, almost ordinary feel, though the county court seal and the raised judge's bench added an air of authority. Rachel and I took our seats at the defense table, arranging our carefully organized documents. Across the aisle, my parents settled in with their lawyer David Brown, who had a reputation for taking on dramatic cases, perfect for my parents' flair for theatrics. When Judge Ellen Harris entered, we all stood. She was a woman in her 60s with short gray hair pulled into a neat bun, glasses perched on her nose. Her expression gave nothing away as she reviewed the docket and called our case. Wilson v. Wilson, civil case number 58312, a claim of breach of verbal contract and unjust enrichment regarding a real estate transaction, she announced, looking over her glasses at both sides. "Counselors, are you ready to proceed?" Both lawyers confirmed they were, and the proceedings began with my parents' case presented first. David Brown approached with theatrical flair. "Your Honor, this is a case of profound familial betrayal. My clients, Susan and Robert Wilson, sacrificed for years to help their daughter achieve the American dream of homeownership, only to be cast aside once their usefulness ended." His narrative was so far removed from reality that I had to clench my fists under the table to stay composed. He claimed my parents had given me $40,000 in cash over 4 years for my down payment, with a verbal agreement that they'd live in the house. He said I'd broken that promise by refusing them, leaving them in financial ruin. My mom took the stand, tears streaming, saying they'd given me cash from their savings and side jobs because they wanted me to succeed. Dad testified that they trusted me and never imagined I'd turn them away. Their story was riddled with holes. They claimed they gave me money at specific times, like when I started house hunting, but couldn't describe the houses when Rachel questioned them. Their testimony felt rehearsed, like a poorly written script falling apart under scrutiny. When it was my turn, Rachel guided me through a clear step-by-step account of my savings journey. I explained how I worked a second job, stuck to a strict budget, and saved every dollar for my house. I presented bank statements showing regular deposits from my employers, tax returns confirming my income, and a detailed paper trail documenting every cent of my down payment. I also addressed the alleged verbal agreement. Your Honor, not only did my parents never give me money for my home purchase, but there was never any discussion about them living with me. The first time they mentioned it was after I'd closed on the house, and it came as a complete shock. David Brown's cross-examination was aggressive, designed to rattle me. Ms. Wilson, are you claiming your parents lied about supporting you financially? Yes, I said firmly. That's the truth. So, your position is that the people who raised you, who put food on your table and clothes on your back, are committing perjury in this courtroom? Rachel objected to the characterization, and Judge Harris sustained it, but the implication lingered. I'm stating facts, I replied, keeping my voice steady. My bank records show where every dollar came from. There were no cash gifts from my parents. He pressed further. And you feel no moral obligation to help your parents in their time of need, despite having a home with extra bedrooms? I've helped my parents many times, I said, staying calm. I've given them thousands of dollars when they were in financial trouble, and those transactions are documented in my bank records, showing money has only ever gone from me to them, never the other way around. As the testimony wrapped up, Judge Harris reviewed the documents both sides submitted. The contrast was stark. My comprehensive records versus my parents' complete lack of evidence. After a brief recess, she returned to the bench, her expression focused. Before I rule, I have a few questions, she said, turning to my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, you claim to have contributed approximately $40,000 to your daughter's home purchase over 4 years, primarily in cash. They nodded. If you provided this money, why are there no records of any financial transactions between you and your daughter? Dad cleared his throat. As I said, Your Honor, it was cash gifts. We trusted Emma. Mr. Wilson, even cash has a source, Judge Harris pointed out. Your bank records show no withdrawals matching the amounts you claim to have given. Your tax returns indicate an income insufficient to provide such gifts after covering your own expenses. Where exactly did this money come from? My parents exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence faltering. We saved it over time, Mom said weakly. In cash. Some came from side jobs, Dad added. Cash jobs you didn't report on your tax returns? The judge asked pointedly. Mom jumped in. We also had some inheritance money. From whom? Judge Harris pressed. My cousin, Mom said quickly. My aunt, Dad said at the same time. The judge raised an eyebrow at their contradiction. Let me be direct, she continued. Ms. Wilson has provided comprehensive documentation, bank statements, pay stubs, tax returns, a clear paper trail. You have provided no evidence to support your claim of financial contribution. Additionally, in Michigan, verbal contracts concerning real estate must be evidenced by some writing to be enforceable under the statute of frauds. It was clear their case was collapsing. Judge Harris's expression shifted from neutral to skeptical as she addressed them. Based on the evidence presented, or rather the lack thereof from the plaintiffs, I find in favor of the defendant. The claims of financial contribution and verbal contract are unsupported by any credible evidence. This lawsuit appears to be without merit and borders on frivolous. She turned to me, her tone softening. Ms. Wilson, you are under no legal obligation to provide housing for your parents based on the facts presented. The property is solely yours, purchased with your own funds, and you have exclusive rights to decide who may or may not reside there. With a decisive bang of her gavel, she concluded, case dismissed. The words echoed in the silent courtroom. My parents sat motionless, as if unable to process the outcome. Their lawyer leaned over to whisper something, but they seemed not to hear. I felt a whirlwind of emotions, relief at the vindication, sadness for the relationship now shattered, and a strange sense of freedom knowing the truth had been officially recognized. As Judge Harris gathered her papers to leave, she paused for a final comment. Family relationships are beyond this court's purview. However, I would be remiss not to note that trust, once broken, is difficult to repair. I hope all parties reflect on how this situation reached this point. With that, she exited, leaving us to face the fallout. As Rachel and I headed for the exit, I heard rapid footsteps in my mom's shrill voice. How could you do this to your own parents? I turned to see them approaching, faces twisted with rage and humiliation. Their lawyer trailed behind, looking uncomfortable with the public scene. Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Wilson, Rachel said firmly, stepping slightly in front of me. This is neither the time nor the place for this discussion. When is the time? Dad demanded, his voice loud. After she changes the locks? After she pretends we don't exist? The judge saw through your lies, I said quietly, finding a calmness I didn't know I had. You never gave me a penny for my house. You made up a story to take something that wasn't yours. We raised you. Mom's voice echoed through the courthouse lobby, drawing stares. Everything you are is because of us. Rachel placed a hand on my shoulder. Emma, we should go. To my parents, she said. I strongly advise against continuing this. The court has ruled. Any further harassment could have legal consequences. Harassment? Dad scoffed. Talking to my own daughter is harassment now? When it follows a frivolous lawsuit based on fabricated claims, yes, Rachel replied evenly. As we walked away, I heard Mom's dramatic sobs and Dad's loud comments about ungrateful children, their lawyer trying to usher them into a private room. The drive home was a blur. I felt victorious yet devastated, relieved yet grieving. The legal battle was over, but the emotional scars would linger. You did well in there, Rachel said as she dropped me off. Standing up to family, especially parents, is incredibly tough. Does it get easier? I asked, unsure what I even meant. She gave a sympathetic smile. The boundaries get clearer. The guilt gets quieter, but it's a process. That evening, alone in my kitchen, I felt empty despite the win. I scrolled through social media to distract myself and found Mom had posted a vague but pointed status. Heartbroken today. When your own child turns against you, you learn who really matters. Some kids forget where they came from once they taste success. The comments were filled with sympathy for her and outrage at me from people who knew nothing of the truth. Several relatives shared it, adding their own remarks about family loyalty. I closed the app, refusing to engage in a public war. The court had seen the evidence and ruled in my favor. That had to be enough. Over the next few days, the family divide became painfully clear. Most relatives sided with my parents without question, having heard their fictional story for years. Why would parents lie? It was easier to paint me as the villain. Then unexpectedly, my Aunt Linda, Mom's sister, called from the West Coast. She'd always been kind but stayed out of family drama. Emma, I wanted to check on you after everything, she said. I braced for a lecture. I'm okay, I said cautiously. It's been tough. I'm sure, she said. This isn't the first time your parents have done something like this. My breath caught. What do you mean? Years ago, before you were born, they told everyone they'd loaned your Uncle James $8,000 for his business. They claimed he refused to pay them back, causing a huge family rift. James finally showed bank statements proving they'd never given him a dime. They admitted they lied because they were jealous of his success. I was stunned. Their behavior was a pattern older than me. Why tell me now? I asked. Because I don't want you to doubt yourself, she said. And not everyone believes their story, even if it feels that way. Her support was a small beacon in the darkness of isolation. In the weeks that followed, my parents made several unannounced visits to my house, leaving notes on my door when I didn't answer. The messages swung between guilt-tripping, "We just want to talk to our daughter," and vaguely threatening, "You haven't heard the last of this." One evening, I came home from work to find them waiting in my driveway. I consulted Rachel about a restraining order. Based on their behavior, a full restraining order might be tough, she said. But we could file for a no-contact order to keep them away from your home and workplace. Would that be too much? I asked. They're still my parents. They sued you based on lies and keep showing up uninvited, she said. This isn't normal parental behavior. I held off on legal action but took practical steps. I installed a security system with cameras and discovered my spare key, hidden outside, was missing. Had they taken it during their housewarming visit? The thought chilled me. I immediately changed all the locks and added a security code to my garage door. My home, which should have been my safe haven, felt like a fortress I had to defend against the people who should have been my biggest supporters. The stress started to wear me down. I jumped at unexpected noises, checked my security app constantly, and felt anxious whenever I saw a car resembling theirs. Rachel recommended a therapist, Dr. Sarah Lee, who specialized in family trauma and boundary issues. In our first session, Dr. Lee listened without judgment. What you're describing is a form of emotional and financial abuse, she said. Your parents created a false narrative, possibly even believing it themselves. When you refused to play along, it threatened their self-image, triggering this extreme response. But they're my parents, I said, the familiar refrain slipping out. Relationships require mutual respect and honesty, she replied. You can love your parents while recognizing their behavior is harmful. Sometimes the healthiest boundary is significant distance, at least until they acknowledge reality. Under her guidance, I implemented a no-contact period to focus on healing. I blocked their numbers, filtered their emails to a folder I'd check only monthly, and told mutual contacts I wasn't discussing family matters for now. This space allowed me to reclaim the joy of homeownership. My house had become a symbol of conflict, but I wanted it to be my sanctuary again. I started with small projects to make it mine, painting the living room a warm blue, planting a flower garden in the backyard, watching with pride as the first blooms appeared. Each change, no matter how small, reminded me this was my space. One rainy Saturday, I decided to replace the old brass cabinet handles in the kitchen with sleek brushed nickel ones. As I worked, I remembered Mom's comment during their visit about how she'd change those handles if it were her house. The memory no longer stung. It was my house, my choice, my life. When a car door slammed outside, my heart raced, but my security app showed it was just a delivery person. The fear showed how deeply this had affected me. Dr. Lee suggested joining a support group for adult children of manipulative parents. I was skeptical but attended a meeting at a community center downtown. The stories I heard were different in details but echoed my own children made responsible for their parents' emotional and financial well-being, manipulated through guilt, punished for setting boundaries. The hardest part was calling it financial abuse, said a woman named Lily. Because they're your parents, you make excuses. They're just bad with money. Or they grew up differently. But when they consistently drain you and guilt you for not giving more, that's abuse. Her words hit me hard. I'd never labeled my parents' behavior as abuse, but it fit. Using guilt to extract money, spinning lies to control me, punishing my independence with a lawsuit. Recognizing this helped me see it wasn't my fault, and I couldn't fix them. They'd need to face their actions themselves, which seemed unlikely. 2 months after the court case, I learned they'd moved to Texas without a word to me. I saw it on a cousin's social media post wishing them well in their new chapter. They'd told family they needed a fresh start, away from painful memories, casting themselves as victims once again. Their departure brought unexpected relief. I stopped checking my cameras obsessively, stopped scanning the street for their car. Slowly, I reclaimed my peace of mind. 6 months after the court case, my house truly felt like home again. The stress and conflict faded, replaced by joyful moments, hosting friends for dinner, reading in my backyard, tackling small renovations like fixing a creaky door. Mia had been right, holding this boundary improved every part of my life. Without my parents' constant demands, I had energy to build the life I wanted. My neighborhood became an unexpected source of community. Casual waves to neighbors turned into invitations to backyard barbecues and neighborhood watch meetings. I grew close with Anna, a librarian next door, and Mark and Lily, a young couple with a baby down the street. We're so happy someone our age moved in, Lily said over coffee on my newly built deck. This area has lots of retirees, which is great, but it's nice to have friends in the same life stage. They never asked me to justify my choices, they just accepted me as Emma, the single homeowner building her life. These simple, genuine friendships helped heal the wounds from my family conflict. Some relatives, like Aunt Karen, stayed firmly in my parents' camp, sending messages urging me to make things right now that time had passed. I responded politely but kept my distance. Others, like Aunt Linda, made efforts to stay connected. "Your parents made their choices," she said during one of our monthly calls. "That doesn't mean the whole family has to cut you off." When my parents moved to Texas, they abandoned a storage unit. The manager contacted me as their next of kin, saying the contents would be auctioned to cover unpaid rent. I went to check, not wanting family heirlooms sold to strangers. Inside, I found mostly outdated furniture and junk, but in a corner was a box labeled Emma, in Mom's handwriting. It held childhood treasures, report cards, crayon drawings, school photos, even my first lost tooth in a tiny envelope. The contrast was jarring. They'd kept these mementos of my childhood while betraying me as an adult. The evidence of their earlier love made their recent actions hurt even more. Dr. Lee helped me process this. "People aren't all good or all bad," she said. "Your parents could have loved you and still acted manipulatively. Both can be true." This perspective let me honor the good memories without excusing their lies. I could miss parts of our relationship without letting them back into my life under the same harmful patterns. A year after buying my home, I hosted a housewarming anniversary party. Friends from work, neighbors, and my support group gathered to celebrate not just the house, but what it symbolized, taking control of my life and standing firm in my boundaries. Maria brought a beautiful houseplant, saying, "May it grow strong roots just like you." Mia gifted me a custom doormat that read, "This home was built with courage." As laughter and conversation filled my living room, I realized I'd created something my parents never had. A community built on mutual respect, not obligation or guilt. The week after, I received a letter from Texas in Mom's handwriting. My stomach tightened but curiosity won. "Dear Emma," it began, "we hope you're well. We've settled in Texas near your cousin Liam. The weather helps Dad's health." It went on for 3 pages about their apartment, local sites, and health updates, but never mentioned the lawsuit, the lies, or the pain they'd caused. Instead, it ended with, "We still don't understand why you turned against us when we needed you most. A house is just a building, but family is forever. Our door is open when you're ready to make amends." The gaslighting was so blatant I laughed out loud. They still saw me as the one who needed to apologize. The letter confirmed Dr. Lee's insight. Reconciliation was impossible without their acknowledgement of reality. I filed it away without responding, a reminder of why my boundaries were necessary. In the months that followed, I kept building my life on my own terms. I mentored Mark on budgeting after he shared worries about their family finances. I volunteered at a community workshop for first-time homebuyers, sharing practical tips on saving and navigating mortgages. Helping others felt like a victory against the dysfunction I grew up with. One evening, while gardening with my new neighbor Sam, a nurse who'd moved in 3 months earlier, he asked about my family. "Do your parents live nearby? Will they visit to see your house?" The question didn't sting anymore. "We're estranged," I said simply. "They struggle with respecting boundaries, so we don't talk." "I get it," he said after a pause. "My mom's similar. Sometimes distance is the healthiest choice." His understanding was refreshing. As our friendship grew over shared yard work and weekend coffee, it evolved into something romantic, and I found myself able to trust in a way I hadn't thought possible. This journey taught me lessons far beyond homeownership. I learned that boundaries aren't selfish. They're essential for authentic relationships. My worth isn't tied to my family's approval, or how much I sacrifice for them. True generosity comes from choice, not obligation or manipulation. Most importantly, I learned that building the life you want sometimes means disappointing others, and that's okay. Their disappointment doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're finally putting yourself first after years of putting yourself last. If this story resonates with you, whether you're navigating tricky family dynamics or fighting for your own independence, know that you deserve boundaries that protect your peace. You deserve relationships built on respect, not control. Sometimes the hardest but most necessary choice is to stand firm, even when those who should love you most try to tear you down. Have you dealt with family feeling entitled to your achievements? Have you had to set tough boundaries with loved ones? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story made you feel less alone in your journey, please like and follow. Creating a life on your own terms isn't selfish. It's the foundation of real relationships and genuine kindness. Thank you for reading, and may you find the strength to honor your boundaries, no matter what.